Today on Newsgirls, Trump hits record low ratings. Corrected a New York Times headline, deported MS-13 illegal alien who's never coming back.
The White House Easter egg roll. Corporations like Amazon, Meta, and YouTube actually sponsored the event.
The black market of restaurant reservations.
Appointment Trader will get you a reservation tonight if you're willing to drop a couple $100.
Paid $2,500 for a reservation at Ralph Lauren's Polo Bar.
Open Table once reached out to us, but we never broke a law.
And life found on a distant planet, K2-18b, is 120 light years from Earth.
Either B, huge discovery, or reading data wrong.
We're glad that you explained that because a lot of the headlines seem to kind of be conflating the two.
Welcome to Newsgirls.
I'm Wren.
And I'm Mabel.
Let's get into the stories. It was an eventful Easter week. The Supreme Court halted President Trump's immigration loophole, the U.S. framework to end the war in Ukraine was released, and all roads led to Rome with the loss of Pope Francis the day after meeting Vice President Vance, and the U.S.-Iran round 2 nuclear talks were held there. So today, there are more political Easter eggs to crack open than real ones in the White House Easter egg roll.
Well, speaking of which, the White House Easter egg roll was this week, and it was kind of weird. So Trump said he's bringing religion back to the U.S., and corporations like Amazon, Meta, and YouTube actually sponsored the event, which has never happened before. So according to the sponsor pamphlet, if you shell out $200,000, you'll receive a custom 30 by 30 branded activation and 4 tickets to brunch with the First Lady.
And ethics experts say this wouldn't have passed muster under past administrations, and it's further proof that these tech giants are trying to make inroads with the Trump administration and that Trump seems to be open to them. And we saw that also at the inauguration with all the tech billionaires in the front row.
Yeah, clearly when you have an in with Trump, it pays off. We see that with Elon and Tesla. But it's still just kind of crazy that it's so out in the open like that. There was all of these tech booths and tents just kind of littered across the White House front lawn, advertising in broad daylight. Since when are corporate logos allowed to be so heavily associated with the presidency?
The Trump administration is ready to recognize Crimea as part of Russia, according to the peace framework the U.S. has proposed to Ukraine to end the war.
Which is unusual because it would undo about a decade's worth of U.S. foreign policy, but these talks are happening, and the framework was actually shared with the Europeans and Russians. But Zelensky has said that his government wouldn't recognize any occupied territories as Russian, calling that a red line.
So Crimea is a region in the southern part of Ukraine that's been occupied by Russia since 2014. And according to the UN, Russia has committed a slew of human rights violations against the Ukrainian people there, from unlawful detentions to sexual abuse and torture to forcing children to attend Russian schools.
Moscow is also reportedly Russifying Crimea, so it's basically providing Russian citizens with all of these incentives to actually relocate there. And it's estimated that over 800,000 Russians actually moved there permanently since it was annexed. And that's in comparison to 64,000 Ukrainians that actually fled the area, with the number of refugees estimated to be twice as high.
Well, the U.S. has really backed Ukraine into a corner because both Secretary of State Rubio and President Trump warned that the U.S. will move on from peace talks, quote, within days if there's no tangible sign of progress.
It doesn't really seem to be in line with what the country's demands are, since it takes Ukraine's bid to join NATO off the table.
The Trump administration is also planning another meeting between Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, who's everywhere, and the Russians to get Moscow on board with the framework.
The Trump administration has replaced the government's main portal for information on COVID with a website arguing that the virus was leaked from a lab.
Yeah, COVID.gov used to have information about how to stay healthy, or you could order your test there, but now it's very different. So we're looking at the website, and the first thing we see is in all caps, lab leak, with a cutout of Trump walking in the middle of it.
I don't know. The true origins of COVID-19.
A moving map.
Very high tech.
That shows that the Huanan seafood market is 7.5 miles from the Wuhan Institute of Virology.
Oh no, picture of Fauci.
And his pardon from Biden.
Of course, an accusation of HHS obstruction.
Classic.
There's no conclusive evidence that masks protected Americans from COVID.
Isn't it just common sense? Oh no, it's 2 cutouts of Cuomo, and it says Andrew Cuomo failure.
Why?
He's not even governor. Trump is going viral for posting a close-up picture of wrongly deported Kilmar Abrego Garcia's knuckle tattoos, claiming they spell out MS-13, the name of a notorious criminal gang. And it's sparking a lot of controversy.
So some people were actually accusing the Trump administration of a botched Photoshop attempt, which I think is a bit too far. It's not like they were actually hoping that people would believe that those were real tattoos.
Yeah, they were clearly just labeling his real tattoos and what they stood for.
But the bigger controversy is, how is the Trump administration so sure that these tattoos actually stand for MS-13? So if you take a look at the photo, it's labeled with marijuana, smiley, cross, and skull. And these symbols haven't been found in any law enforcement guidelines or manual as being identified with MS-13. And apparently the only way to confirm what the symbols actually mean are from informants within the Terrorism Confinement Center in El Salvador.
Yeah, so we really dug into what people were saying to back up this claim that it stands for MS-13. So the M for marijuana, the S for smiley seems self-explanatory, but Y is a cross, a 1, and a skull, a 3. But I guess people speculate with no proof that Kilmar originally had a 13 tattooed there, but that he's covered it up with a cross and a skull. Other people say that the skull stands for a 3 because there's 2 eyes and 1 mouth. But then we were like, what about the nose?
Interestingly, another piece of evidence that law enforcement is really using to make this case is that Abrego Garcia was wearing a Chicago Bulls hat. So a gang field interview sheet from a police department noted that wearing this confirms that he's a member in good standing with MS-13.
ICE has detained people, even students in the past, for wearing Chicago Bulls memorabilia or drawing a bull and horns on a paper or something. So I guess it is a known gang symbol, but just because you're wearing it doesn't mean it's related. And the White House has been running with these speculations and even corrected a New York Times headline from Senator meets with wrongly deported Maryland man in El Salvador to Senator meets with deported MS-13 illegal alien in El Salvador who's never coming back.
Which is wild, since in court it was revealed that Abrego Garcia was accused of being a gang member in New York where he never lived. So there's really no hard evidence linking him to any gang activity, which is scary because such flimsy accusations and evidence can get you deported and land you in prison.
Well, the act that the Trump administration used to deport Abrego Garcia and over 200 other accused gang members with no due process, or the Alien Enemies Act, has been temporarily halted by the Supreme Court. So that means Trump can't send anyone else to this infamous CCOT prison in El Salvador.
And this act has only been used 3 times before in U.S. history during periods of declared war. The last time was to send the Japanese to internment camps during World War II.
Apparently, 50 Venezuelans had already been loaded on buses heading to the airport to fly to El Salvador when the Supreme Court's decision came in. So that was paused, which I'm actually surprised Trump didn't carry on anyway, since he's done that in the past, when he refused to turn the plane around.
So we'll see what happens, since the Supreme Court has signaled that it'll say more in the coming weeks about the Alien Enemies Act. And we're expecting more details about what circumstances exactly can this act be invoked under. So DOGE is bringing in data from the IRS, HHS, Social Security Administration, and voting records and building a master database to surveil and track undocumented immigrants.
So historically, ICE and Homeland Security would need to file a court order in order to obtain this kind of information. And usually it's segmented across multiple departments. So this type of pooling has never happened before.
So Customs and Immigration Services already has a pre-existing lake of information on undocumented immigrants, but most of that is about benefits and pending cases. So what DOGE is doing is basically adding all of this data to it, including biometric data like fingerprints and voice recognition. And having all of this in one place makes it just so much easier for the government to surveil, geolocate, and track targeted immigrants in real time.
Obviously, this raises major alarms with experts over privacy violations, not only for undocumented immigrants, but also for citizens. Quote, what we're seeing is likely the first step in creating that centralized dossier on everyone in the country.
Earlier this month, the Department of Homeland Security struck an agreement with the IRS to use tax data to search for more than 7 million migrants that are working and living in the U.S. And apparently high-ranking IRS officials said that this was extremely troubling, and many of them resigned over it.
And ICE is paying software giant Palantir $30 million to build an immigration surveillance platform. Currently, ICE doesn't have any tools for tracking self-deportation in near real time, so this would provide that.
So the platform is called Immigration iOS. So clever. And we actually looked through the filed contract, and it said the app would have 3 core functions that would essentially streamline the identification of aliens and their removal from the U.S. with the goal of making deportation logistics more efficient.
And it's just weird that nowhere in the contract does Palantir explain where they'd even pull this data from. But I guess a prototype is expected in September, so we'll know more then.
And to round out our section on crazy immigration updates, the Trump administration moved to classify more than 6,000 living migrants as dead, canceling their social security numbers. And this basically wipes their ability to work, receive benefits, or even access their banks, and is basically a move to try to get them to leave the country.
The U.S. and Iran met again last weekend in Rome to continue negotiations on a possible nuclear deal, and things seem to be going pretty well. Both parties are ready to move on to discussing the technical details, like what's the maximum level to which Iran can enrich uranium, or what size can their nuclear stock be, or how would they be monitored?
Which is exactly what the Obama-era nuclear deal that Trump called a disaster and pulled us out of did. So we're all kind of waiting to see what Trump and his team can actually pull off, because there's a big chance that what's going to happen is that Trump pulled us out, promised an amazing deal, let Iran enrich uranium for 7 years, and then made the exact same deal again.
But Mabel, he's known as a deal maker, so I have faith he's going to deliver. And there are a couple ways that he could set his deal apart from Obama's. He could insist on full nuclear dismantlement, which is what Netanyahu is obviously pushing for, but Iran seems completely against, understandably. And Trump's team is also split on whether Iran should retain the ability to make nuclear fuel.
We're also curious to see what Iran will actually do with all of the enriched uranium it has, because under the first deal, it actually had to transfer it to another country to comply with terms. And if Iran has to do the same thing now, it would probably have to transfer it to Russia, which is like, why would we want Russia to have weapons grade levels of uranium?
Well, they set a third round meeting for this Saturday, so we'll keep following.
So we thought we'd end this political rundown with something that we never really cover on Newsgirls: ratings. So Trump's approval rating on the economy dropped to the lowest of his presidential career. A survey of Americans showed Trump with 43% approval and 55% disapproval, and that's the first time in any CNBC poll that he's been net negative on the economy.
But that's not all the bad ratings news for Trump, because CNN's latest poll found that among independents, he has the worst approval rating of any president ever at this point in a presidency. The previous record was set by him in his first term, but he's outdone himself this time. I guess independents feel like he's catering too much to his right-wing base.
And Trump is so obsessed with ratings, we kind of assumed that it would be pretty rough for him, but he doesn't seem to have quite come to terms with the reality of the situation. He posted on Truth Social, "Trump's best poll numbers ever, thank you," without revealing the poll that he was referring to. If you're dying to try the spicy rigatoni at Carbone or the lobster caviar rolls at Corner Store, it'll probably take you months if you're lucky. But websites like Appointment Trader will get you a reservation tonight if you're willing to drop a couple $100.
Appointment Trader is the biggest name in this emerging black market of restaurant reservations, where you can buy or sell lucrative bookings and they take 20 to 30% of the sale. So the more in demand a restaurant is, the more expensive it would be listed for. Like over the holidays, a couple paid $2,500 for a reservation for two at Ralph Lauren's Polo Bar, and someone recently paid $7,000 to score a table at London's 2 Michelin-starred Indian sensation Gymkhana.
And since the pandemic, for some reason, getting trendy restaurant reservations has become literally impossible. So there are so many restaurants where people have to go online the second that reservations become available at 6 a.m., 2 months before the exact date to even stand a chance. And it's actually so rough that booking confirmations for 4 Charles Prime Rib, which is a popular New York steakhouse, have been spotted on Hinge and Tinder profiles.
Well, even Hollywood elites are struggling to get in these days. Like Justin and Hailey Bieber were turned away from Carbone when they showed up without a reservation. So they turned to professional reservation flipper, who charges a fee of $500 to $1,000 for his help.
But if you don't have a professional reservation flipper like the rest of us, one of the only ways to secure an in-demand reservation is through platforms like Appointment Trader and Sita. So as you can imagine, they've stirred up a lot of controversy, especially from diners who are kind of saying that the world of restaurant reservations has become like a high-speed trading market.
And from restaurant owners who don't like that they're being cut out of these transactions, then that third parties are profiting from selling tables at their establishments. Like, restaurants argue that they're undermining the dining experience and can lead to empty tables, because what if no one purchases the reservation and then it sits empty, as opposed to if it was just canceled and someone else could have booked it?
Then there's the whole argument that platforms like these are basically creating a second market where people are just booking reservations to sell them and then increasingly turning to bots. So elite restaurants like Le Bernardin and Raoul's in New York actually have designated staff that scope through reservations to suss out bots by looking for weird emails or disconnected phones.
Well, West Village's popular Bangkok Supper Club, which is one of the toughest reservations to nab in the city, has been subject to bots designed to check for sudden openings up to 100 times a minute. So how could normal people compete with that?
And so that's why states like New York are really cracking down on these kinds of platforms. So a first of its kind law called the Restaurant Reservation Anti-Piracy Act went into effect in February. And it basically says that third-party reservation services can't advertise, promote, or sell reservations without a written agreement with the restaurant, and violators are fined up to $1,000 per instance.
Which means Appointment Trader and other pay-to-play websites, as the governor calls them, have had to shut down operations in New York. But platforms like OpenTable and Resy, which partner with the restaurants, are not impacted.
And similar bills are being proposed in California, Florida, Illinois, and Louisiana, where the issue actually gained a lot of attention during the Super Bowl, where a customer paid more than $2,000 for a table.
So we're talking to Jonas Frey, who's the founder of Appointment Trader, to get his reaction to these bans and pushbacks to all the criticism of his platform.
An Appointment Trader is a global brand. Frey has said that the app currently performs the best in Paris. It's made $6 million on secondhand bookings in 2023. And Frey says that his mission is basically to help people get tables for a fair market price.
A criticism is that they make restaurants, especially the high-end ones, less accessible to the everyday people. What would you say to that criticism?
We're talking about restaurants like Tatiana in New York or the Polo Bar, where you just, as an everyday guy, you have no way of getting in. You just can't get in there. I think the conversation is very biased. Because it's not like because of Appointment Trader you can't go to Olive Garden anymore. We're talking about a few ultra high-end restaurants which you just could not get into anyway, and it's not like the dinner is free there. We're talking about restaurants where average checks are $200-$300. These are not the restaurant where families now are unable to attain, because before they were going there every Friday.
The criticism would be that it's not like Appointment Trader is necessarily making restaurant reservations available for everyone. It seems like it's still targeted towards a specific kind of person. So who would you say that the ideal user of Appointment Trader would be?
I do hear that argument a lot, but I don't see why that would be accurate. We are literally the definition of a free market, right? Somebody says, this is the Polo Bar, and I have a restaurant reservation for it. And based on historical trades, people were willing to pay $300 for that Polo Bar reservation because the demand outweighed the supply by that much that it fetches a premium of $300 for a Friday night, right? Now, for instance, Delilah Las Vegas in off-season often sells for $10. Like I've purchased a $10 reservation there. Now, who is the target customer? I'd say whoever wants to go to the particular venue that's being listed, right? And we don't impose any sort of pricing. I mean, the minimum transaction price, I think, is $1.
You've called the New York legislation that banned third-party apps horse shit.
Okay, so this, I actually love the press. I said, man, it's horseshit. I'm like, oh, don't quote me on that. And of course, now
it's the headline, yeah.
It conveys how strongly you feel. Why do you think it's such a mistake, this legislation?
If there were millions of consumers that say, shit, we can't go to restaurants anymore, this needs to be stopped, it would be a different story. But the way this legislation came about was that American Express purchased the reservation platform Resy in 2019. In 2021, they rolled out global dining access for Amex Platinum cardholders, which, by the way, has a $700 or $800 fee per year. If you're a high-end cardholder of us, you can get this special access, right? And then 3 weeks later, Resy, which is owned by American Express, publicly lobbied for that bill. And it's not that they say reservations can't be sold. It says, unless you have a deal with the restaurant, you cannot sell the reservation. And within 3 weeks, that was voted through. When you book a restaurant reservation, most restaurants make you put in a credit card, which means you're liable if you do not go. This means you are liable, meaning it's your reservation. Who the hell are they to not allow you to sell it? If you are liable for that reservation, or if you pay a prepay, $900. Now, your mom has a problem where you just can't go and you change your mind. Why, if you are liable, can you not sell that reservation? That's nuts. And that's why I said that, because it goes against anything that capitalism is, which actually is the reason for the prosperity in this country.
We're glad you brought up American Express and Resy, because we wanted to ask you about that. Like, the restaurant reservation industry seems like very competitive. We know OpenTable is partnering with like Visa, and Amex obviously owns Resy and now Talk. Are you facing pushback from them?
You would be the first news outlet to finally quote me on that. It would be nice if you did. I love American Express. I love that business. I really do. They are a great company, and I understand what they're doing. That being said, right now, we come from the consumer end, right? American Express has never targeted us directly. Resi actually has not either. Open Table once reached out to us through their general counsel, but we never broke a law. That's why they had to create a law to make it illegal. We've had restaurant groups like Hoxall was one of them, which owns Fort Charles Prime Rib, which has sent multiple cease and desist letters to us. But we never broke a law, so there was nothing they could do about it. And the reason why Hoxall is so against it, and this is the crazy part, is Fort Charles Prime Rib has a deal with firms from Wall Street, where Wall Street firms pay large sums of money so they have tabs on restaurant reservations there.
And we know that there's other legislation being introduced around the country that kind of exactly copies the one in New York. Like they leave a loophole for apps that partner with the restaurant. Is that something you could do?
That's not a loophole. That's the design. You got to remember this was lobbied for by American Express and Resi, right? Now they have partnerships with restaurants, of course. The customer of Resi is the restaurant, not the consumer. Therefore, Resi needs to cater to the restaurant, not the consumer, right? So all the interest is driven from the restaurant side. And the restaurants, they live off of appearing exclusive. The reason why they hate us so much is because we have a top list that says, hey, in the last 7 days, this restaurant was the most popular. It's not moderated. It's just user content showing you this is actually in demand. Restaurants hate that fact, just like they hated restaurant reviews that were on Yelp and TripAdvisor when they came out.
Do you see like any of the downsides for the restaurants? Like we've heard, what if the reservation that's being sold on Appointment Trader doesn't sell and then the table sits empty?
We did 60,000 transactions or 50,000 transactions, something like that in the last year. If we had 90% of reservations that don't sell, that would generate so many refunds and so many chargebacks that our business would implode. If you upload 10 reservations and you sell less than half of them, your account goes in a warning state. And if it goes even lower, your account's being banned. So people who just make 100 reservations trying to sell them, they won't even be able to upload them to Appointment Trader because it blocks them at 10, right? And then as you become successful, your limits go up. And the top seller, like last year, the top seller made $360,000. Our no-show rate is less than 1%. Because we track that, right, when people upload it. The industry no-show rate's 20% or sometimes 30%. Makes sense. People pay money for a reservation, so they're more apt to go.
We know that bots like are a huge problem in like the restaurant industry. So it's like weird that there isn't like legislation targeting that. How does your platform, make sure that there aren't any bots?
People that create reservations with bots have very high cancellation rates. Thus, they have high refund rates on Appointment Trader. You can't stop it, right? You get people that sign up and then they try to do that. Within the first few uploads, their account gets banned because the reservations get canceled. There is literally an act that's called the Bots Act. These legislations say, oh, bots are this big problem in restaurant reservations. And there is a law that's called the Bots Act for tickets. You could have easily just amended it to reservations. That's why I said it's horseshit, because if you really dig into it and you look at everything, is that they say bots are the problem, but they're not targeting bots. People always pretend as if all the laws that are being created are made for consumers. Most laws are created because a lobbyist that's paid by a company lobbied for something. We're the biggest player in the market. We connect consumers, and we always make sure that we don't hurt market participants.
Major space news. Scientists have found the strongest evidence yet of life on a massive distant planet called K2-18b, which is 120 light years from Earth.
So 1 light year is actually 5 trillion miles. So my mind can't even wrap around how far K2-18b is, but the James Webb Telescope was actually able to study it and found that the planet's atmosphere suggests an abundance of a molecule that on Earth is produced by single living organisms like marine algae and bacteria.
The research was conducted by a team of scientists from Cambridge University, and the lead researcher said decades from now we may look back at this point in time and recognize it was when the living universe came into reach. If we confirm that there's life on K2-18b, it should basically confirm that life is very common in the galaxy.
And K2-18b is a type of planet known as a sub-Neptune, which is pretty common outside of our own solar system. So they're bigger than the Milky Way's rocky planets, but smaller than Neptune and the other gas-dominated planets.
And these planets are so mysterious, no one knows for sure what they're made of. Some scientists think the surface is covered with warm oceans of water, others think it's like molten rock, and others think there's no surface at all and it's just gas.
So after looking into all of this new research, we had to learn more about how scientists discovered the molecules, the different theories of what K218b is actually made of, and if we should be skeptical about life on other planets. So we spoke to Alexandra Doughton, who you probably know as Astro Alexandra. She has millions of followers and used to be a former communications specialist at NASA and Space Force.
Alexandra, just to set the scene, how big of a discovery is this?
This is a really hard question to answer because this could either be a huge, huge discovery pointing at aliens for the first time, or it could be reading data wrong. There are kind of three possibilities here. The first one is that this detection could be wrong. This is an exoplanet incredibly far away. It's 124 light years away, which is, trillions of miles. And reading chemical signatures in that atmosphere is a very difficult thing to do. Another option is that this molecule, this compound called DMS, could be created by something other than life. Now, this is very interesting because we don't see that on Earth. On Earth, this is only created by life. So if this planet has some sort of chemical process that we don't know about, I find that very, very interesting. And then, of course, the big one would be if detecting this compound is our first evidence of finding aliens for real. And that, of course, would be maybe the biggest discovery in humanity because it would change our meaning in the universe.
Can you just explain to us what these molecules that the scientists found are? We understand that on Earth, as you mentioned, they're found in living organisms. What are they?
So what was detected was either a compound called dimethyl sulfide, or DMS, or dimethyl disulfide. They're very similar. That's primarily produced on Earth by marine life, so algae and phytoplankton, and then it's released into the atmosphere. Actually, if you smell sea air, that's the smell of DMS. It has kind of a cabbage-like smell. It's also produced by bacteria. It's produced by fungus, truffles specifically. All of those things are life, and for that reason, this compound, DMS, has been considered a biosignature.
What other means could it be produced in outer space?
This is really hard. It could be produced without life, but we don't really know how. But we have actually detected DMS on a comet before, a comet I believe called 67P, and that was followed by a spacecraft from the European Space Agency that actually followed this comet and took a sample of this atmosphere that actually also detected DMS, and this comet seemed pretty lifeless. There definitely could be processes that create this compound, but we don't know what that is.
Right. So we read somewhere that scientists are performing these tests to produce DMS through non-living means. Do you know what those experiments are?
My best guess would be that they are creating simulations based on what they imagine the environments on exoplanets could be. So, they could do a really hot world, they could do a really cold world, a gas world, all of these kinds of things, an ocean world, and simulate what those conditions might be and what elements, what chemicals, what compounds might exist there and how those might interact with different environmental pressures.
So it's not like the scientists went out and was able to collect this like atmosphere gas. So how did they identify that these molecules are in this planet?
Yeah, so this is an incredibly cool process called spectroscopy. So the James Webb Space Telescope, which was used here, was looking at the star that this exoplanet was orbiting. And if you imagine looking at the star through a telescope, you can see the planet when it orbits and crosses in front of the star. And so when that happens, that planet is a shadow. What you can see is a sliver of its atmosphere. And then that's a unique barcode basically for the atmosphere of that exoplanet.
We understand that that's another debate kind of being had, what is the makeup of this planet, and that's being debated. So can you tell us a little bit about what the different theories are?
So it has a hydrogen atmosphere. The main theory right now is that this is an ocean world. So an exoplanet that's pretty much covered in ocean. Now, I think that we might be a little biased because we know that DMS comes from marine life on Earth. So I think we might, be jumping to conclusions here, but that's just me. What we see is that there's not a lot of ammonia in the atmosphere. And so a reason for that could be that the ocean absorbed it. But this can also happen with molten rock. molten rock can also absorb it. So it could be a planet covered in molten rock, which is also really cool. Alternatively, this planet is more massive than Earth. There's this kind of vague class of exoplanets between the masses of Earth and Neptune that we don't know a whole lot about. And this planet kind of falls into that. And so it could lean towards Neptune. And it could be a gaseous planet, a gas giant, in which case it wouldn't actually have a surface at all.
So does Neptune not have a surface?
Does not have a surface.
Ooh.
I never realized that. That's
Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune, and Uranus, none of them have a surface.
Whoa. Oh, it's good you started this whole conversation with a little bit of skepticism, because we know that the level of confidence is only 99.7, but I guess in the science world that isn't concrete enough. 99.99999% to be able to say solidly.
It definitely makes the results less confident. And a lot of people also are kind of misreading that to mean there's a 99% chance that this is life, which is not what it is. It's a 99% chance that this chemical was detected, which is a huge, huge difference.
We're glad that you explained that, because a lot of the headlines seem to kind of be conflating the two. You worked at NASA, you worked at Space Force. What is kind of the energy like within the scientific community? Is everyone kind of taking it with a grain of salt? Is everyone kind of seeing that this is a step towards this big scientific discovery, like you said?
I've seen a big shift. So at first, I think in general, people were cautiously excited, maybe doubtful, but there was some excitement there. I feel like there's been a big shift. And now I would say that overwhelmingly it's the scientific community trying to manage the spread of misinformation from these findings. So I think now it's kind of like a crisis management mode, but at the same time, they're really cool findings because of what it could be.
And so looking forward, we talked about how now scientists will try to replicate to see if there's any non-living ways to produce these molecules. Will it be checked by other scientists? Like, what is next?
Absolutely. It has to be checked by other scientists. I think a lot of telescopes are going to turn towards this exoplanet. The James Webb Space Telescope is the most powerful telescope in space, but we also have other telescopes who are capable of looking at exoplanets when they cross in front of stars.
And I guess our last question, as a big space creator, you're obviously like plugged into everything that's going on that might not even make it into the headlines. What keeps you most excited about space exploration today?
I love things like this. I really love anything that gets people looking up space and interested in space and interested in astronomy. We as humanity have a lot of ambitious goals of, traveling to other planets and exploring them in that way. And that's very exciting. But I am always so blown away and impressed by our ability to find out ways to explore even farther from Earth and finding these new techniques and new telescopes and new ways of imaging things and being able to draw conclusions in that way, because we can travel so much farther through space by doing that.
Well, thanks for tuning in.
Join us next week for an inside look at the first election in Elon Musk's town called Starbase.
Ooh, bye.